My name is Terrence Brown. I am the Zone 2 Director and excited to welcome you all this evening to um, one of our Founders Day events as we get ready to celebrate our founding this coming Friday. We are starting off with one of our storied members who's going to share with us his life and some of his experiences with NPhA, what it means to him, amongst other things. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Leonard Edloe. And Mr. Edloe is the pastor of New Hope Fellowship in Hartfield, Virginia, and former CEO of Edloe's Professional Pharmacies in Richmond. He is an educator. He served on clinical faculty of 4 colleges of pharmacy and the executive in residence at the Longwood University School of Business and Economics. He is an adjunct professor of Christian ethics at the Leland Seminary and clinical professor of pharmacy at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Pharmacy. He is a leader both professionally and in the broader community, serving as vice chairman of the Board of Visitors of Howard University College of Pharmacy, treasurer of the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia. He has served as president of the American Pharmacists Association Foundation, many community and health boards, and often was the first African American to serve as chair or president of those organizations. For 9 years, he hosted a radio show focused on health, religion, and politics. He was the first Black president of the Virginia Pharmacists Association in their 141-year history. He is also the author of Restoring the Glory, Breathing New Life into the Rural Black Church. Excuse me. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy from Howard University and his doctorate from the University of Florida. He also holds a Master of Divinity degree from the Samuel Dewitt Proctor School of Theology of Virginia Union University and a Master of Theology at Union Presbyterian Seminary. He has received numerous community and pharmacy awards. He is a fellow of the American Pharmacists Association and our National Pharmaceutical Association. He continues to practice serving at the Daily Planet Health Center and Bremo Pharmacy. He resides in Mechanicsville with his wife Sarita and is a proud father of one daughter, Leonard Lenise. Dr. Edloe, I will pass it to you. Take it away.
Good evening, and thank you so much for this opportunity. This is a conversation that was supposed to be held at the Massey Cancer Center at Virginia Commonwealth University, and a 3-part conversation discussing the book Legacy, A Black Physician Reckons with Racism in Medicine. And I don't know where her name is, Uche Blackstone, MD. And because of the executive orders of the president and of the governor of Virginia, not only did we not get to meet Dr. Blackstone, her reception was canceled and my presentation was canceled. But the National Pharmaceutical Association always has a way of bringing things home for my family. So I'm thankful for that. It starts all about my father. And you can go to the first slide. He lost his father along with 3 brothers during the Spanish flu of 1918. And it's more traumatic than we think because the social safety nets were not there at that time. No Medicare, no Medicaid, no Social Security. And starting at a young age, he had to work. He cut lawns in New Jersey. He worked in a glass factory. He worked in the pool hall and bowling alley on U Street in Washington, D.C. And he and Dr. Shade, who was a physician that went to school around the same time, they say they used to hustle all the boys when they came down from Philadelphia and New York to pay their tuition. But he decided to become a pharmacist. He was also a mechanic. And he was working on a Model T Ford that fell off the rack. And so that's when he decided to go to pharmacy school. And how he made it through pharmacy school in those difficult times, I don't know. But I remember when I was smaller, he'd always go to DC and he'd tell me how these people, he ran the elevator in an apartment building, they bought the books for him. And so we'll go to that next slide. Back then, they were called colored pharmacists. In fact, in the 1980s, I had a white pharmacist call me and said, I really have to respect you because you joined your father when they were considered colored pharmacists. In other words, they would fill prescriptions. This was a thing they said that nobody else would fill or that people weren't going to pay for. But in many instances, the only opportunities they had was to own their own pharmacies or to go to work in the post office. He wanted to go back to Stanton to start a pharmacy. And the president of the bank said, well, if you can keep the pharmacy open for a year, I'll loan you the money. And we know how that works. In fact, the president of the bank, not only was he president of the bank, he owned the only pharmacy in Stanton. And it was even so engraved that when I was in my automobile accident, a lot of things got misplaced. But I had an article he had when it was announced that he had passed the board. They listed all the white pharmacists first, and then at the bottom they said colored. He was a role model at home for me, going with my father to the pharmacy, and that's on the next slide, made me who I am. It was a small pharmacy. It was an old pharmacy, but it seemed bigger than life to me. I always tell people, most people just know about the pharmacies that I built starting in the late 1970s, but I always said it was hot in the summertime and cold in the wintertime because it was just that old and just structurally not what it should be. But I would always stand there and always he compounded prescriptions and gave advice on OTC products to patients and sometimes even first aid. And as I traveled, I forgot about this when I was doing my presentation. I was involved in model cities, and I was in Pittsburgh, and the guy saw my name, and he said, I know you got to be related to the man I work for. And he said, what really impressed me, when I was hired to work, he told me to bring my books to work with me. And he said, I couldn't figure that out. I'm riding a bicycle delivering prescriptions. He said, but when he got back, he would tell him to go into the office and do his homework. And he got paid. If he finished early, he got to study longer and but still got paid, paid for working and paid for studying. And my decision, I was in the third grade and they were going around the room. They asked everybody, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a pharmacist. And when I told my father, I don't know where he found these little white coats from, but he got white coats for me to wear in the pharmacy. And as we got older, back then, pharmacies had their own products. So in other words, olive oil, terpene hydrating codeine, camphorated oil, and they would come in these big jugs and we would have our own labels and he would allow me to pass that on. And he constantly told me his story. And as I tell people all the time, if I'd gotten paid for half the prescriptions he gave away, I don't think I'd ever have to work because that's just the kind of person he was. And so now to transform more to what I did, I was paid by the Commonwealth of Virginia to get this, not to attend the then MCV College of Pharmacy. So in other words, I got a check, and they also paid for me to come home twice a year. And back then, Black pharmacists were not allowed to become members of the Virginia Pharmaceutical Association. And because they had those affiliation agreements back then, if you didn't belong to the state association, you couldn't have joined the American Pharmaceutical Association either. But just going 100 miles off the road, crossing the Potomac River, when I got to Howard University, it allowed me to join the student section of the American Pharmaceutical Association, where I started my leadership journey. And, for those who are Christian and read the Bible, you might hear people say, all things work for good for those who love the Lord and according to his purpose. So what they intended for evil, or as Joseph said to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God did for good, because uh, knowing the election for national office in the in the student section, I didn't get any votes from any of the schools in the South, so I would have never made a chapter officer, a regional officer, or a national officer. All right. When I finished all of that, I returned to Richmond. And one of the first things I did, believe it or not, was to join a program that recruited healthcare students to the Medical College of Virginia, not just the pharmacy school, the dental school, the nursing school, the medical school. And, it was strange that in the 72 years the pharmacy school had existed, only two Black pharmacists had graduated, William Cooper and Archie Baskerville. And Archie didn't even stay in pharmacy. He went and became a leading cardiologist in Richmond. And what I did, I embraced pharmacy students and graduates of pharmacy. And this was the thing I found out: when they would go to work at other pharmacies, even though they were had graduated. And see, back then you didn't get your hours in school. You had to get your hours when school was out. They did not get paid to work to get those hours. And so I hired a lot of, I had a waiting list of students, and I just loved the interaction I had and continue to have with students. And even though I joined the Virginia and the Richmond Pharmaceutical Association, I spent a great deal of time developing leadership skills in other organizations. And that's how I want to say this. I just think that as pharmacists, don't just get caught up in pharmacy because there are too few positions. And in the world, there are so many things where they can use both our leadership skills and our expertise. I often say, pharmacists are some of the most intelligent people in the world. And it shows itself when you see the pharmacists who go into law, how great they have been, the pharmacists that go into medicine and dentistry. We can do so much. So, but then I found out there was a contrast in pharmacists and pharmacy leaders, especially in the South. And so a lot of my white counterparts were suspicious of me, but the association leaders, Sam Crittenberger is one in Virginia. Becky Sneed was another one in Virginia. And then William Apple, who was CEO of APHA, they just embraced me and encouraged me to run. And in the 1970s, I was asked to run for president, not knowing I was just a sacrificial lamb. That for many years in these pharmacy elections, they had decided who was going to win, and they just put somebody else on the ballot to say somebody had was running against them. But there was no chance for me to win. And when I realized what was going on, I almost decided to just drop out and concede right away. It was real strange, though. In 1972, I joined the clinical faculty as a clinical instructor at the MCB School of Pharmacy. But the connection was I was invited by two faculty members who I'd served in student APHA when I was a national officer. And so they were the ones that invited me in. And I'm still to this day a part of that clinical faculty. Then I just decided to return to pharmacy leadership. I was invited to serve on the APHA task force on women in pharmacy. At Howard, we always had women at pharmacy, and I think that's one reason I was asked. And then Dr. Apple and knew me very well because my biggest secret when I was at Howard, Howard had a small library, And I just happened to find out about the library at APHA. And I would go down there, and Dr. Frankie, who was the librarian then, would help me with all of my books and everything. And people would always say, well, how can Edloe do the assignment? And he's never in the library at Howard. It was because I went there. But when we released the report, the first thing they did was ask me a question about race. So in other words, rather than talking about women, they asked about race. And I couldn't figure that out. In 1982, I was appointed to the Board of Trustees of APHA. I was the third Black person to serve. Why can't I think of the woman's name that's right on the tip of my tongue? She was the first president, and then Byron Rumford was Speaker of the House, so they had served, but I was the youngest person ever to serve. And after my appointment, some of the board members said, I was there because Dr. Apple orchestrated my appointment, not because what I was doing. And during that time, I would attend, Mary Munson Rush. Thank you so much. I attended the annual meeting of BPHA on numerous times. And even though I was the first Virginian to serve on the board in 20 years, they never said anything about my being there. At first, I wasn't paying attention to it, but Leo Ross, he's a pharmacist here in Richmond, and when he came to Richmond, he was working for Wyatt, and he came down to work for Robbins, and it was a problem with the hours, and I talked to people and whatnot, and I helped him, and Leo's done a great job. But he reminded me that they never acknowledged my presence. And I thought about that. I didn't include it in the slide, but with the Bowl of IGEA, I was on the board of the APHA Foundation when we endowed that so that award could be given nationwide. And I know at least 4 or 5 occasions, I was on the board for 6 years and 2 years for president. They never even said, come up and help present the award, that you were the one that helped, fund it. So it's just amazing. But at those annual meetings, that's when these clouds started showing up. One time I noticed the chairman of the board of pharmacy, was watching me, and he got on the elevator with me and asked me, how could I accomplish all that I had done? And then there was an article done in the APHA Journal on computer systems, and I was one of the first pharmacists to purchase a standalone computer system. And when the article hit the paper, another board member called. She said, "I thought you owned the old rundown pharmacy." Well, in 1974, we had built this new medical building, some positions now, and it showed it wasn't that. And then, it just got crazy. Every time I looked, the inspector was showing up. And then they sort of sanctioned me for having 3 telephone narcotic prescriptions that had not been signed. But I always wondered about that. And one day I was making a presentation. Tony Brown was one of the presenters, and another religious leader came up and sat down beside me, who had worked for the Board of Health Professionals. And he said, Edloe, he said, "You real lucky." He said, "I don't know who you said something to or who but he said, their intention was to shut your pharmacy down." And I don't have it on here about this other incident, but the same thing happened in 2 instances with the PBMs. Once it was PCS, then they came in and did an audit, and they said that they were going to put me out of the network. And I did the numbers, and my error rate was less than 1%. And it just happened at the time I knew Bob Johnson, who was chairman and CEO of PCS, and I wrote a letter. So nothing ever happened. And then in the probably about 2010, 2011, I had an audit done by Medco, and it was for 100 prescriptions, and 67 of them were for AIDS drugs. And I asked the guy, what was it about? He said, well, a lot of people are selling the drugs. And I said, well, I know better than that because I knew it was a setup a few months before the audit. I started getting these faxes where I could get my AIDS drugs for half price. And I told my director of operations, put it in the trash can because I could be charged with not only fraud, but using unadulterated drugs. But I was at a church a few years later. In fact, it was 2016 preaching. And when I got through, I stayed around, welcomed people, thanked them for coming. And when I walked outside, this lady was walking away from the car where my wife was. And she apologized to my wife for having been a part of an audit. The whole purpose was to set it down. So shut my pharmacies down. All right. So another change of direction. After an unsuccessful run for president of APHA, I turned my focus to serving the community. I got my degree in divinity and my PharmD. And I got the chance, and this is why I say go on the outside. I got the chance to serve as vice chairman of the board of a foundation and to chair their grants committee, and they had assets of $500 million. And so I learned all about governance, all about finances, things that I could use as I went into other organizations. I served as chairman of the board of the American Heart Association for Maryland, D.C., Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And I mean, on that board sat the vice presidents and senior vice presidents of Bank of America, Wells Fargo, even insurance companies. And I never will forget, I challenged them when we had the downturn in the economy. They wanted to fire people. And I said, we're going to just have a hiring freeze and see what things happen. This was a mindset because I care about people. I said, we'll see what happened. And we did not have to fire a single person. I also, was serving on the board of the VCU health system. And that's interesting because not only do you have people on the other side block you, you got folks look like us who are what I call gatekeepers. And I never will forget, I was driving to the church I was serving at before I served there to do the funeral from this lady who had accused me of killing her son. And I was on the bridge open, waiting to cross, and I got a phone call from the Secretary of the Commonwealth who said, people are saying it's a conflict of interest for me to serve on that board. I said, well, I don't have any contracts with the university. I said, sure, I have pharmacies, but my contracts are with the PBM. And so I got through, and it was really a good experience. I got to be the first pharmacist to chair the Quality, Safety, Risk, and Credentials Committee. And I'm glad to say under my term, we had the best review from Joint Commission. And as the CEO of the health system and vice president for health services said, when we used to have meetings, he said he didn't realize pharmacists, and he had a pharmacy school under him. He didn't realize the clinical skills that pharmacy have. So that just, lets us know what to do. And then I had disappointments at the School of Pharmacy. I had a friend who had belonged to the church. I was an assistant, had been promoted to assistant clinical professor of pharmacy. And he was the first Black city manager of Richmond. And we got to talking, and he said, well, they make you assistant clinical professor and you stay there forever. And so I said, wow, I've been there a long time. And so I asked to be promoted to associate. And the opposition I ran into, it was horrible. It took over 2 years. And at the same time, I was approving funding for the renovation of Smith Hall. And the president of the university asked me to work with the pharmacists. Of course, they didn't want to work with me. And then there was a healthcare fellowship that I wanted to do. And so I went in and did my interview and told there was nothing I could learn from the experience. They were going to move me from an assistant clinical professor to a assistant professor of policy and research, developed the curriculum. And to this day, I've never taught. It's just, it's real hard. And then progress and challenges in 2007. And that's why I mentioned Becky Sneed, because I think she had a lot to do with it. She was executive director. I became the first Black pharmacist ever to receive an award from BPHA, the Bowl of IGEA. I'm glad we have two more who've received it since then, Leo Ross, and Leo also followed me as the second Black president of the Richmond Pharmacy Association. I was appointed to the board of the BPHA Research and Educational Foundation. And as pharmacists, because we never get outside, that's why I'm going to keep saying this over and over again. We just keep repeating what we already know. And so I brought all of this serving on boards of hospitals, foundations, large organizations like the Heart Association, and they would not embrace any expertise I brought to the board. When I started talking about burn rate, in other words, how long could you run if you didn't get any more money in? They didn't want to talk about, when I talked about rolling quarters, where you give out, a certain portion of what you have, that just wasn't wanted to be heard. But the thing that got me, they wanted to update the HVAC system in the building. And then I started hearing all these comments about Mexican and Mexican products. And it was so troubling to me, I resigned from the board. Because I think everybody on this call knows, when you've experienced racism, you know it when you hear it, no matter how it's dressed up. And I should have segued into this here, but I talked about how the executive director resigned when I was president, but she was Hispanic, and she had shared with me some of the problems she had. And so I just know that was a part of it. In 1997, I entered the ministry, and one of my pharmacists nominated me for the Hugo Schaefer Award. And even though I'd been on the board from 82 to 86, I still received the minutes. And so I got the minutes and said the nominations would be reopened so a better candidate could be found. And so that's when I resigned my membership from APHA. But then in 2010, I met Tom Minigan, CEO of APHA, and he encouraged me to join again. And in 2012, I was elected to the board of the foundation. But I'm elected, and you get in there, and people, they didn't even read my resume. They want to know where I come from. They totally ignored the fact that I had served on the board of APHA in the 80s and done a whole lot of other things. But just that insider thing, and then because I look different. And the same thing on that board, more the progress and challenges, even though I own the chain of pharmacists, had great nonprofit credentials, many times when they set up committees to discuss new sources of income, I was never included. And then I never will forget, one year during the meeting, they did have me chair the governance committee because they knew I could bring about the change I need there. I was asked to serve as vice president, and I never heard anything else. And when things went down, the former treasurer, who was going to term limit out at the end of that year, he was elected vice president. So the following year, I was elected vice president, and then in line to become president. And it's amazing, when the election came up, remember I talked about sacrificial lambs. One thing I changed was you had to have two truly qualified candidates run. Two of the people who lost, they got upset, and they said, well, we shouldn't have the election now. We should let the new board decide. In other words, they didn't want me to be president, but I reminded them of what the Constitution and bylaws said. So I had the opportunity to be elected, and I'm glad to say I served with two distinction for 2 years. In fact, when I got through, Tom Minigan gets up and he says, Leonard Edloe made me look like the smartest person in the world when I suggested they have him run for the board. Uh, while serving on that board, I was asked to run for president of Richmond Pharmaceutical, who had never had a black president. I hesitated, but I had a good friend, Dennis Helen, and he asked me, and I ran and became that first black president in the history of APHA. And then in 2015, after being recognized for my service to the Commonwealth by the General Assembly, receiving the Hugo Schaefer Award from APHA, they finally said, well, we got to give them the Outstanding Pharmacist Award. And that's the first black in 134 history to receive that award. And here when it starts getting crazy again, in 2012, I was asked to chair the task force on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was already serving on the APHA task force, and I hesitated, but I agreed to serve just because of the history I brought. And so it went well until the report was released. And then I started receiving calls about, they weren't going to have this wokeness. Others threatened to drop their membership if the report was adopted. And strangely, some of those people, I never saw them when I was installed as president-elect, when I was installed as president, or the year when I served immediate past president. And, they even questioned the historical events that I had experienced. But thankful for the younger pharmacists and the, more open-minded pharmacists, the report was adopted. And it got to me in 2024 as a theologian, liberation theologian. I understand that a lot of this problem comes from the theology that made us inferior. And it was taught in school, it was taught at home, it was taught in the church, and it was enforced by culture, and it has never been untaught. And so what we see is not the rebirth of what we're seeing when people are questioning DEI, it's just the reinvigoration. But there's one woman, she came up and she had opposed the resolution, and she came up and apologized, and she just shared that she was brought up to think certain ways. And, having watched me and seen me in action and learned about me, she learned that a whole lot of things that she had been taught was wrong. 2021, again asked to become president-elect, to run to become president-elect. I hesitated. However, I ran. In both of these instances, when I was asked to do something, it was Kelly Gould. And Kelly Gould is from Richmond. And when I was president of the foundation, which she was president of the association, so she knew what I could do. She saw how I turned that organization around. So in 2022, I became the first Black president. The association, we very successful, well-attended annual meeting, and several bills that had failed in the General Assembly several times, I was able to get them through the scope of practice and provider status. And like I said, but everybody could see the good vibes going on between the executive director and myself. And, she just used that as a way to get out at a very good time, and no one could question motives. So unless somebody shares, they still don't know why Christina left. But that's when things really started to fall apart at that. With a small staff, I decided just to keep the ship running. In other words, not to add anything, just to keep the programs we're doing. So I called for a search committee. Nobody wanted to chair, so I had to chair the committee. And committee came up. We recommended a bright, intelligent, talented black male to serve as director. And then all of a sudden, I started getting these calls to see other candidates. And I think one of the persons who had talked about all the stuff was going to happen about the resolution, I think that was the person that was leading the uprising. And so I'd never seen in governance when a committee brings a candidate in for the office that, it's allowed. So they selected another person, and I said, okay. But then I learned because of technical difficulties, most of the board members didn't even hear the interview of the black candidate. And so that really bothered me. And then we go a little bit further, more things. The president-elect decided to resign, and I was chair of the nominating committee. And to me, it's good governance if something is happening in an organization that the membership needs to know. And my suggestion was totally ignored. I said, I'm not going to participate in the project. And I would say, well, you don't want to be immediate past president. I said, no, I'm going to serve as that. But that happened on many occasions. I sent emails to the president. They never answered, meeting schedule without my input as the time. In fact, they selected a time where I taught my class on Monday night from 6 to 8:50. And then, even when this so-called special meeting, it was weeks before I was even informed of what transpired at the special meeting. So on December 31st of last year, even though I've made history, I've resigned my membership in VPHA. And so reflecting on this, and I hope we can have a conversation there, I don't regret anything I did. I do it again. Leading in pharmacy is very difficult. And that's why I share these things, because when stuff hits you and you don't know where it's coming from, I want you to know it will happen. And, there are very few opportunities for training on the duties of board members. And that's why so many things get messed up. Like I said, with the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, we would go on retreats for 3 days and just learn what we were supposed to do and what was expected, how to do things, how to read the reports and what had to be, the reports that had to be read. And I've been on some boards of large organizations, and because they don't have board training, they're making the same mistakes that, they shouldn't. And I'm very thankful for the support of NPhA. A lot of people say, well, why have you never run for office? Well, if you serve somewhere else, give somebody else the opportunity. But I always feel like, and my father never shared this with me, I'm always proud of the fact that he was one of the incorporators of NPhA. I didn't find that out until I went to Atlanta to receive the Hugo Schaefer Award, and a guy from Texas A&M, I think, walked up and he said, "I'm so glad to meet one of the incorporators." I said, "It was nowhere in the world I would be able to walk like I am if I was one of the incorporators." I said, that was my father. And we've got to expose young people to the profession. And I know it's difficult, but that's one of the major problems the College of Pharmacists face right now. Young people want to become pharmacists, but as pharmacists, we're telling them not to go into it. And then when we get them in, we've got to serve as mentors. That's why I stayed on the clinical faculty at BCU and served all those other schools, because sometimes you need to see somebody who looks like you, know what you've been through, to be able to just, talk to you and work things through. And then the most important thing, we've got to share our expertise with other healthcare organizations, National Kidney Foundation, Heart Association, whatever it is. do it because they can use our expertise. And we've got to step forward and be leaders, not just in the profession of pharmacy, but in healthcare in general. Uh, and when we step forward, people will call on us. When Virginia was in a, you know, they were, Virginia could not have an unbalanced budget. They were going to have one. And one of the members of the General Assembly, I was working in the Model Cities program, and we met, and he was the leader in the House, and he came to me, what can we do? And I told him about the preferred drug list. Saved the state $800 million in the first 6 months. And so uh, Mark Warner owes me till the day because of what, we saved his administration. And just like I did it, y'all can do it. So I've talked a lot now. I want to have a conversation. So I'll answer. I'm very transparent. I'll answer almost everything. If it's in the 1%, I won't answer that. I won't get it. Thanks. Okay.
All right. Well, I'll say first and foremost, just thank you, for your service, for your, the challenges that you work through and live through and continuing to go forward with that and sharing it with us. Um, and the floor is open for questions. If you'll raise your hand or drop it in the chat, I'm going to stop sharing so that the slides are not a distraction and we can have a conversation. It's right at 6:44, so we've got a good bit of time. If there's any questions or anything that anyone else wants to share.
I'll start. Good evening, Dr. Edloe. Thank you for sharing your story. I am Megan Brown. I'm Megan Brown. I'm a pharmacist and a clinical associate professor at the University of Mississippi. I believe we've interacted maybe once or twice at conferences in passing. So grateful for your support of NPhA. And yeah, like I said, I just believe there's such power in storytelling. And so I love hearing stories, and I love learning more about just the history of pharmacy, and specifically as it relates to the challenges that we as Black pharmacists face. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Hope I see
Yeah,
you in Cincinnati.
I sure will be there, God willing. So my question to you is, as someone who is also, I work for a school of pharmacy, and so having the, I guess, challenge maybe or pressures of being active in pharmacy associations and really having to push forward, and in the Deep South, as you mentioned a number of times, it still is a challenge. It still becomes a challenge to figure out where to balance being involved and how to push things forward when sometimes that people aren't necessarily going to be behind you in those. So when we're thinking about all the DEI related stuff and just how all of that has been affected and just the laws that have come out related to that, but still desiring to do that work. I'm grateful to NPhA for holding space for us to be able to do that work. But do you have any thoughts on solutions or opportunities for us to figure out how do we move that forward in other spaces as well?
Well, it's how I want to say it. You got to inform people. You got to let people know what's going on. And then a lot of that education deals with us. Uh, I'm labeled the radical preacher because I deal with it face on, and I take advantage of any. See, you take advantage of any opportunity. I write a column every month for a rural newspaper, and I deal with this thing, and you got to be tough skinned, uh, and you got to be determined, and we're not in church, but you got to stay prayed up because Christina told me one time we were having a board retreat for the foundation, and she said, if you could sit in that room, I had to sit in that room. And that's what you just got to do. You got to be there. Somebody's got to be there to know what's happening. And the sad part is sometimes we even know more and can do more than they can. A lot of states are going to, the transparent PBMs for Medicaid. Uh, I tried to get that bill through last year, but it was a whole lot of stuff going on. The Democratic leadership was having to run in with the governor. But I was at a private function and I spoke to both the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. And so I put it on their radar and got to know them, who they were. And then I was at another function at the Library of Virginia, and I saw the chief political correspondent for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and that's the paper of record for Virginia. And I got him to write an article on the 15 counties in Virginia that had one or no pharmacies. And this is the sad thing. They published it, but the association never used it. Never used it. So you got to stay there for the young people who are there. I mean, I was even though they aren't student NPhA, what they call it, the Black Pharmacy Group. I go down there, take time and spend a day with them just to be there. And even though I was at the opening of the Prescription for Change and had been there to speak several times, when they came back, I was there with them again. They need to see us. They need to know what we can do. And I hate to tell you, a lot of times you're going to want to do things and they're not going to allow you to do it. They're going to come up with an excuse. And the favorite one they use is the ACPA reaccreditation thing. Well, we're changing this and we're changing that. And it always seems like our things get left out. But building relationships so you can talk to the students privately about DEI, because I think I heard how your presentation has been sent where it shouldn't have gone. Am I correct about that?
You are correct.
So, and sometimes, our own people will do it. So, I mean, but I've just been willing to just put myself out there. Life is not easy for anybody. And sometimes, we just got to go through these things and know that it's going to make a difference. And I guess because have known Chauncey Cooper personally, and then like hearing the statements that people made when we dedicated Chauncey Cooper Hall, how when he being the first Black dean of pharmacy, discussion was who was going to be Chauncey Cooper's roommate. And I mean, now I don't have to worry about, I can afford to have my own room, but just to think if somebody had to go through that, it will be difficult for us. But when we go through it, we're going to make it better for somebody else. Like I told you, my father had that little pharmacy, and just the people in the small area knew who he was. But he planted that, and that ended up being 4 different operations, all in modern medical office buildings, serving a region, not just a community, but a region. So just be encouraged. And, if you you want to talk, just email me, just leonard.edloe@gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat so everybody, because it's all about that, us helping one another. And that's why I took the time to share tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
There's a great question and great feedback. Next up, we have Adrian Washington. Go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, Dr. Edloe. First, I want to thank you for just sharing with us the history and your journey, because being a pioneer is very difficult, and it comes with a lot of sacrifices. But the thing that resonates the most with me from what you've shared is you stayed true to you and your integrity and your purpose. And oftentimes in these types of situations, it's very difficult. So I do want to thank you for just sharing this experience and your journey with us. Now to my question. Um, Looking at not only where the profession is going, but just what's happening in the dynamics of our communities and society. What advice would you offer us as pharmacists and NPhA as an association to really become more collaborative and more effective in educating and really taking a position around some of these headwinds that are happening?
Well, when it comes to education, that's the most important thing. And it's all about partnership. And who are you going to partner with? Now, people always ask, how can you be a pharmacist and a pastor? I say, because I love people. So I do a lot of health education, not only in the church where I serve, but I help other churches. And we even involve the students, pre-COVID, we would even involve the students, have them come over, do blood glucose and blood pressure, and just talk to people. People, we serve a lot of people, and they really don't know, and they're really afraid. Uh, in my intro, I talked about the 9 years being a talk show host, and you would be surprised. People who I had never met before would call me on that radio, never been in my pharmacy, and ask me questions about their medication. You know, why is my metformin? Why do I get upset? My stomach upset every time. A little question like that, something we know. And we've just, we got to make people know who we are. Uh, uh, our president-elect is not on the call tonight, but when he came down to see the exhibit, he was asking me about convention space. Well, let me tell you, NPhA, if they came to Richmond in 2026, it would be in the news, because I think that's where we mess up a whole lot. We don't promote ourselves enough and what we do. It should be a press release going out when we get to Cincinnati that NPhA is there. Invite the reporters over, and let people know, here's this Black organization of pharmacists that have been here since 1947, and what they're about and what they're trying to do. That's the key. Just getting people to know you're there and what you know. And sure, you're going to run into resistance, because people say, well, you just a pharmacist. What you know? You don't know anything about anything. But, you answer those questions for them, and you tell them things. And like I said, this guy, he was the CEO of the BCU Health System, the senior vice president for health services, and he didn't know the clinical skills that pharmacists had. Now, something's wrong with that. Something's wrong with that, that they don't know that. And just like, we were talking about, question came up back then, we didn't have the DOACs. All we had was Coumadin, and, was about the guidelines. And, I explained, how the drug is metabolized differently. And, he said, well, that's the greatest explanation of pharmacogenomics I've ever heard. We've got it. Be there. Be ready to open your mouth. Don't be afraid. But we've just got to tell our story and what we've done. And when I saw our president with her program talking about, the museum, when I think about the old guys, the Chauncey Coopers, the champions, all these guys that have gone before us, the Isaiah Burtons, we need to learn all we can to tell their story, so we can build on these things. So I hope, Adrian, I answered your question. I welcome you. We can have we had that conversation, because it's little things that we do that make a difference, that opens the doors. Who thought when I went into this Model Cities program, which was about redevelopment and community in the 1970s that had the infrastructure of the 1900s, I would meet this young lawyer and we would be lifelong friends. And he would be my entree into the governor's office whenever I needed anything, and made a difference in the Commonwealth to this day.
Thank you, sir. You absolutely answered my question and laid it out. Thank you very much.
Right.
All right, I do want to share a couple of comments from the chat. Dr. Michelle White says, thank you for your insight and sharing your life with us. Rainey Wilson says, thank you, Dr. Edloe, for sharing your career and experience. The part I take most from you is the roadblocks you faced are in recent times. So we must always be diligent, present, and persevere. And at that point, she was commenting as you were speaking, just taking advantage of opportunities. And then Stephanie Hassan. So thanks so much for this presentation. I have to jump to the Chicago Pharmacists Association board meeting. So inspirational. Let us keep showing and representing our profession. And thanks to everyone for questions and comments. As a pharmacist and pastor, you are providing physical and spiritual healing. Thanks so much for this information. So I see our Madam President, Dr. McCants, has joined. Dr. Walleen, you raised your hand and put it down. I don't want to skip you if you got something. Otherwise, I will heed
Oh
the
yeah,
floor.
if I may, yes, I won't. I know we're at time, so I was going to ask Dr. Edloe. So as everyone else says, thank you. I always thank him as being a mentor through the years. One thing I appreciate about you when I look at it is that as we're telling the history, as you mentioned, of the others, the champions, and yourself as well. I'm always, I don't know if you gave a story about, Dr. Chauncey Cooper, which you gave a little bit, knowing that for me, not only is your father one of the founding members, but you actually were taught by Dr. Cooper as a student in pharmacy. So I always am enthralled by the idea that even though we know he's our founder of our organization, that we can touch you, and you were taught by him. So if there's any of those stories, maybe at another time you would like to tell, I'm sure there's some great anecdotes, just so that we also know, being Founders Week, about you, but even more about who Chauncey Cooper was, and allowing this new generation to really understand how the shoulders that we stand on, and also to the point of a question that was something similar asked earlier. We're now in a time that our country is trying to go back 50, 60 plus years, and our organization is vital just as much today as it was then, and knocking down some of those doors and keeping us active. So again, some of those thoughts or suggestions on how to, keeping our prominence. And you also have taught us that you're throwing the gems out of staying involved politically. Sometimes I think most of us stay away from politics, but you constantly have shown like you must be at the table, and you must be part of advocacy, and you must be part of the legislation. So thank you for sharing that. And I don't think we probably pay attention to that enough.
Yeah, I made a presentation on Chauncey and my father. What I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure I send an electronic version to the president so they'll have it, because I really enjoyed that in Atlanta a few years ago. And then someone else talked about integrity. Look, that's the only thing you have. People can't take it away from you. So, hold on to your integrity, because that's what they want to do. They want you to lose it, and then they can do with you whatever they want. But if you got integrity, say what you mean what you say, they can't take that away from you.
Thanks for those comments, Dr. Walleen and Dr. Edloe. And at this time, I'm going to introduce or pass the mic to Madam President, Dr. Tamara McCants. The floor is yours.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we
I
can.
hope so.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Dr. Edloe, I would like to thank you so very much for appropriately kicking off our 2025 celebration of NPhA Founders Day. Um, there's never enough times or too many times where we can thank you and your father and the legacy of the Edloes for all you have done for the association, for pharmacy as a whole, and to continue to be inspiration for pharmacists, Black and other minority pharmacists like myself and others, that there is no limitation to where you can go. And you always represent that for us. And so I really appreciate you accepting our invitation to kick off our Founders Week this week. And I want to say thank you so much to the members that attended today. I hope after listening to Dr. Edloe that you are inspired, that you understand that we are not new to this, we are true to this, and we will persevere through these times just like we have persevered through other times so many times before in the past 79 years. And so I wanted to send a shout out especially to Sam Green and Chandler Fullington, both of you guys, for coordinating this week for us. And thank you, Dr. Brown. You are the gift that keeps on giving to just being the moderator for tonight. So I hope that you all are excited and that you realize that we have to tell our own stories. I was inspired by Dr. Edloe's post that said that somebody told him that he couldn't tell his story. So I wanted to remind you, Dr. Edloe, and everybody else on the call, NPhA will always provide a platform for our stories to be told. And so I hope that you guys can join me on Instagram Live tomorrow as we talk more about the importance of us preserving our history. I just thank you all so much for the privilege of serving as your president during this time. We are here to support you, and we will do anything to make sure that you all as members are able to thrive in whatever work setting that you're in. So Dr. Edloe, thank you so much again for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for that. And that will be our closing for the evening. Thank you for joining and for listening. And again, Dr. Edloe, for sharing your story and for the comments in the chat and the questions that were asked out loud. Thank you all for engaging with us. And as Dr. McCants mentioned, tomorrow, Instagram Live at NPhA Pharmacy, 6 p.m. Eastern. Preserving Our Legacy, a NPhA History Project fundraiser, and that will be led by Dr. McCants herself. I'm putting my email in the chat, so if anyone has any questions or follow-up, and there is a link to the LinkedIn posting for tomorrow. Just that's another way to get the information. But thank you again, and happy Founders Week. Hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow.